Hi, I'm Jen at Snapdragon Quilting. Today I'm going to be talking about stitching fabric to paper. In the quilting world, we call this foundation paper piecing. You may be asking yourself, why in the world would I stitch my fabric onto my paper? Well, there are a couple reasons. One is accuracy. This technique provides accuracy because you're stitching directly over the lines. So you're creating perfect seams that all are going to fit together in the end. The other reason this is accurate is because fabric has stretch, so we can pull on it, and especially if we pull on it in a diagonal direction, our fabric stretches out of shape. When you're stitching the fabric to paper, the paper doesn't stretch, and so it's creating some stability so your block stays perfectly shaped. The other benefit to this technique is that you can create all sorts of different designs, different shapes, different patterns. If you look around on the internet, you've probably seen that there are a lot of foundation paper piecing patterns out there, especially for just a block. And all the blocks have so much character. I've seen tigers and ice cream cones. I've seen Harry Potter themed blocks. The possibilities are endless with this technique. It is actually a lot of fun once you get used to it. The problem, though, with jumping into one of those really darling fun blocks is that you may try it and find you get really frustrated because you don't understand the technique beforehand. And I don't want that to happen. I want you to still be able to do all those fun blocks if you want to. And so I have intentionally designed a series of foundation paper piecing hexagon block patterns to help people learn and master this technique so they can use it like a stepping stone and jump into any other foundation paper piecing pattern, no matter how complex, and have success with it. So let's get started. To do this technique, you're going to need a few things. The first thing, obviously, is a pattern that has your foundation paper piece templates. The ones that I have shown here are striped Hexis, which is the easiest one. That's these blocks up here. Equilateral gone awry, which is the blocks here in the middle. And then That's About You, which are these blocks here. These patterns are thick because they contain all the foundation papers in them. So with each of these patterns, you can actually make 20 blocks. You're also going to need a sewing machine, and when I do foundation paper piecing, I like to set up my sewing machine for this technique using a shorter stitch length. So my machine defaults to a stitch length of 2.5. I turn it down to 1.5. You also want to use a thread that's not very thick. As you do these blocks, it's not that big of a deal, but as you get into more detailed foundation paper piecing, you're not going to want a lot of bulk from your thread, so I recommend using a 50 weight or thinner. You are also going to need a seam roller like this. If you don't have a seam roller, no big deal. You can also use an iron, but with foundation paper piecing, you have to make sure your steam is off because we don't want steam to get into our paper and distort it or make it fall apart. The other caution, if you are using a dry iron, is you never iron on the ink side, just because we don't want ink to transfer onto your iron and then it potentially could get on your fabrics. So when you're ironing, you always iron from the paper side. I like to have some kind of plastic card, and this is important because we are going to fold this, and this helps make really precise, sharp folds. I also like to start each of my blocks with a dab of glue. I'm using Sew Line's, it's a soluble, water-soluble, washable glue pen. It's a little bit narrower than a glue stick, so again, if you're working with really little pieces, this is nice, but on these big pieces, you can use a regular glue stick. And then a rotary cutter and a mat to cut on. The last tool that you're going to need is the add a quarter ruler. And no, you don't have to have this tool to do foundation paper piecing. You can use any ruler that has a 1/4 inch mark on it. But I find this ruler is really easy to use. And the reason is on the back side, there's actually a lip. And this lip will butt up against the fold on our paper as we work with it. And so you can use that fold, put it in the crease, and then cut your 1/4 inch seam. It makes it really easy. And then besides tools, of course, we're also going to need fabric. Foundation paper piecing can be a little backwards thinking, and so I find that learning with fabrics that don't have a right side, that are the same on the front and the back, work really well. So batiks are perfect for this, and then most solids are the same on the front and the back. So find one of those as you're learning. Once you get more comfortable with this technique, jump into prints. And just like sewing traditional blocks, if we put the right sides together, you're going to be fine. One of the first things that you want to do is cut out your template. And there are a few things you're going to notice when you're looking at this template. One of them is that the template is numbered, and these numbers are used to indicate the order to add fabric. So we're going to add fabric to shape 1 first, and then shape 2, 3, and 4. In a more complex pattern, you will have multiple foundation paper piece templates to stitch to other templates, and so you'll also see that they will have a letter. I did not put a letter on these because these are all similar, interchangeable. You can sew them together however you want, so there's no specific order that they need to be assembled. But if your pattern that you're working with does, you want to make template A first, and then make B, and then sew those two together. The other thing you'll notice on this foundation paper piecing template is that I've included the seam allowance all the way around. And I like to do that because it makes it easier as you're working with it to remember to put fabric there, but also to stitch them together once you've got all of them put fabric on all of them. And if you look close, you'll see we're going to stitch on the line in between each shape, and I've extended that line into the seam allowance to remind you to stitch all the way to the edge. And so that's on both sides. On more complicated foundation paper piecing templates, there may be shapes that don't go into the seam allowance on the edge, and you'll see there won't be lines that extend for those. You just stitch up to the edge and back. Okay, so enough about the template. The first thing we need to do with this template is fold on the stitching lines. And it's really important that we take our time and fold these really accurately, because we're going to use them later with our add a quarter ruler to make our seam allowances, and we want these really accurate. So that's why I like to use a plastic card. I set it right up on the edge of that line and then fold the paper over. And then I like to come back with my card and just really flatten that out. And so let's go ahead and do that with all of the lines. And if you find you fold one and you go back and look at it and you're like, well, that's wonky, don't worry, just go and refold it, no big deal. And if you're folding a template that has shapes that don't go all the way through, that's fine. Just make the folds go all the way through, no big deal. All right. See, this one isn't as accurate as I wanted. Let's do that one again. I had the card in the other hand. I like to hold my card in my right hand. See, it was a little bit off, but that looks better. Okay, let's add some fabric to this template. So now we're going to add fabric to shape 1. And because I'm using a solid, it doesn't matter which is the right side. But if you are using something that is like a print that has a right side, you want to put that face down, because on the back side of our template, we want our fabrics face up, and we're going to glue these together. I like to work with strips of fabric if I'm doing a lot of the same pieces, because it makes it really easy. You can also work with scraps. You could work with a fat quarter. You could work with a full yard of fabric if you want. It really doesn't matter, because we don't have to cut it out until after we've already applied it. I'm going to take my glue stick here. Let's get some glue out. And when I glue this first shape on, I like to put the glue on the paper and not on the fabric, because the fibers of the fabric grab a lot of glue and then end up getting a lot of glue, which I don't need. I only need a little bit. When we put this on, it's really important that everything is covered. Oh, I barely cut this big enough. And so we're thinking about the seam allowances that we see, but we're also thinking about a seam allowance here above our shape that's not on the template. And so you can fold this over and you can peek and be like, oh yeah, I have plenty of fabric over here. You don't want your fabric too small, because it's a pain to go back and take it off and fix it and put a new piece on, especially because we're going to be stitching with a shortened stitch length. So really important here, you triple, double, quadruple check, make sure you have enough fabric. And I am cutting it a little close on this margin, but that's okay. And now, since I've cut this with a straight edge, I can actually line this piece up right onto the edge of my fabric. but I don't have to, because later at the very end, we're going to trim all the way around. So this fabric is actually fine hanging over, and I'm going to leave it just so I can show you at the end how easy that is to trim. So once I've got my template in place, I'm just going to secure it. This is a big shape, so I'm going to put glue on both sides, and you don't need a ton of glue. This is washable. It is all going to wash out. Now let's say I've glued this down and I don't like where it's at. Just take it off and then do it again. No big deal. It's easy to fix. You know what? If I put this on an angle, it's going to fit a little bit better. Let's do that. Say good thing I took it off. Let's just put a little bit of glue on that corner. Okay, that looks great. Once you've glued your first piece down, before I forget, some people don't like to glue, and that's okay. You can pin this on. I just don't like to get poked. I don't like it flopping around. When I use glue, I get both edges, and so it stays right where I put it. So that's why I like to use glue. So now we need to trim. So I'm going to take my mat, and we're going to trim right between shape 1 and 2. And we're going to create our seam allowance. And I'm going to use my add a quarter ruler, and it's going to sit right on that fold that we made, and then I can easily cut. And I have that perfect 1/4 inch seam. And now we are ready to add fabric to shape 2. Let's see if this one is big enough. Yeah, this one should be great. When we add fabric, the nice thing is if you've cut a strip or you have a scrap that has a perfectly straight edge, you can line this right up, and then you don't have to trim this again. But I'm going to pretend that my piece is really irregular, and so we'll go back and trim this so that you remember. If I was working with prints, I would put these right sides together, because that's really important. Fabric touching fabric, right sides together. And the shape here that we're worrying about is shape 2. So if we open it up, you can see it again, but we want to make sure shape 2 is covered while it is folded. And this is the part that I find tricks people. It's easy to see this right here because we have a very straight shape, but it gets a little bit tricky with triangles because when you fold over an irregular triangle, it flips directions. And so double, triple, quadruple check and make sure that shape 2 is completely covered while the paper is folded and the fabrics are together, right sides together. There's a few tricks I have to do this. One is to use a Lightbox. So here I have gone and put my foundation paper piecing template on my Lightbox, and this is really helpful when you've got weird shapes. Not as valuable here because I've cut such a big piece that I can just visually see that shape 2 is really well covered. But if you're trying to use less fabric, make less waste, cut a smaller piece, this will come in handy as you'll want to see through and make sure you've got room there. Another trick, instead of, well, you can use your Lightbox, you can use a window, you can use your computer screen, you can use the light on your sewing machine. Any light source that works for you is great. I have a Lightbox that I find this works really well if I'm sewing in the evenings or at night and it's darker. The Lightbox just shines so beautifully and it works really well. But another trick is to go ahead and place your finger or your card along the edges of shape 2. So I can put this right here on the edge of shape 2, and then you can lift up and peek. Do I have at least a 1/4 inch or more over here? Yeah, I do, no problem. And then you can turn it and you can do the other side. Let's leave the blue one down. So if I put this on the edge, oh yeah, I've got plenty of room here. This is another good trick. You can also just pick these up in your hands and pinch along the edges and look back and forth. Do I have enough room? And then a final trick is to take a pin and go ahead and pin right on that stitching line. Maybe I'll do one on the other side too. And pin on that stitching line. And that way you're holding your fabrics in place, and then you can fold up your shape and you can fold up your fabric. And this, if you're having a hard time with a weird triangle, this is a good way to do it, because then you can flip them both up and you can easily see I've got more than enough fabric to go all the way around. And like we talked about, when you're learning this technique, cut your pieces bigger, because it sucks to go and take off a smaller piece. So I've cut this one quite large, but as you get comfortable, you can use smaller pieces and just make sure you've got at least 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch all the way around. All right, so we have quadruple checked that we have enough fabric. So let's go stitch it. So take your fabric and your template over to your sewing machine, holding the fabric for fabric 2 in place so it doesn't shift, and then go ahead and open up the paper. And we're going to stitch directly on the line between shapes 1 and 2. Remember to set your stitch length to 1.5 so that you have a shorter stitch length. And the benefit of this is it will make the paper really easy to tear out in the end. I like to use a clear standard foot with my needle in the middle so that I can see that line going straight down the middle. And I like to take just a couple back stitches to start, just to secure that so that it doesn't come out when I go ahead and take the paper out. Just 2 or 3 stitches is more than enough. I'm going to stitch this all the way across, staying directly on the line. And then go ahead and back stitch again, just a little bit to get those stitches to stay secure so they don't come out when we take the paper out. Now that we have our fabric for shape 2 stitched on, we need to go back and trim off the excess. And if we had lined it up perfectly, we could skip this step, but if we're using an irregular scrap, then we want to go ahead and trim that extra fabric off. So just butt the ruler up against the fold of the paper and easily trim that to 1/4 inch. And now we can unfold the paper and lift our fabric up. And I like to just feel and make sure that I don't have any extra fabric here, because if we leave this folded over a little bit, we're going to lose our accuracy. So you really want to pull that fabric all the way up out of the way. And then I like to give it a press with my seam roller. Like I talked about earlier, you can go ahead and iron this with a dry iron, but I find the seam roller works great. Just give it a quick little press. And then from here, we're going to do more of the same. And so we're going to work with shape 3. So I'm going to fold the paper back, trim off the excess. And this time, I'm going to actually line this up perfectly so we can skip that extra step of trimming. So we're going to put these right here together. Really important that we are making sure shape 3 is covered while the paper is folded. So I'm going to do the lift method. I'm going to put this right on the edge of shape 3. And if you can't see that fold very well, take a pencil and go ahead and retrace that line. But I can see it pretty good. So I'm going to lift up. Oh yeah, look, I have more than enough fabric on that side. Here's the other edge of shape 3. I have more than enough on this side and again on this side. So now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. I'm going to stitch right directly on the line with just a couple back stitches to start and end. Be right back. Okay, I have stitched my next color fabric right sides together. That's going to be for shape 3. And so if I had put an irregular piece of fabric on this side, then I would go ahead and I would trim this again. But since I worked with a fabric that had a straight edge, I could line it up, call it good. And then we're going to open this up and make sure we have it pulled all the way back. No extra fabric hanging out in our seam. Give it a quick press with a seam roller, and then we're going to do our last shape. And you can see as I'm adding this on, we have lots of extra fabric around the edges. but that's fine. At the end, we're going to go and trim it all. So let's just keep on going. We're going to add the last fabric for shape 4. So fold the paper back, put your ruler on, set it up against the fold, give it a quick cut, take your final fabric, and this edge looks really straight. So I'm going to line those up, and we want to really make sure shape 4 is completely covered while the paper is folded. Let's line that up a little bit better. And our fabrics are together, right sides together. So we can do the lift trick, peek under that side, do the lift trick, peek under that side. We have plenty of fabric. I'm working with big fabric. So let's go ahead and stitch these together. Be right back. Okay, I have stitched on our final fabric, and if I were to have had a really irregular shape, I would go ahead and trim this again. And arguably, we could have trimmed the fabric for shape 3 at this point too, as long as you're comfortable making sure that fabric for shape 4 completely covers. Then that would be another way to save you a trimming step, is just to go ahead and trim both of these at the same time. But regardless of when you trim it, the most important thing is you trim it before you stitch on another piece of fabric, because once we've added fabric, we can't get back in under here to trim that seam. And so we want that seam trimmed before we add the next fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and just gently pull this back, make sure I don't have extra fabric in that seam. And now we have completed adding fabric to our entire shape. I find sometimes with these bigger shapes, people don't like this flopping around, the fabric flopping around. And so if you want, you can come in here and glue that fabric down so that when you're sewing this to another piece, it's not flying in the wind. And the final step is to now go and trim all the extra fabric off. I like to use my 1/4 inch, my add a quarter ruler here too, because I can use that line of the 1/4. You could go ahead and use a regular ruler here too if you want. Let me turn this around here. Really important though, you're not bending your body in weird positions to cut this, so move everything to get it right in front of you. And go ahead and trim this off. And let's do the last side. And these are equilateral triangles, but with these corners trimmed, they are so easy to put together. So I do like to take the time to trim these little corners off. And that is our completed shape. Look how beautiful that is. And how easy was it to make it this accurate? When you get to this point, you may be tempted to go and flip this over and start tearing the paper out. But I would strongly recommend you leave the paper in until you have stitched this triangle to all the other triangles, because we've not been worried about bias and our fabric could stretch. So keep that paper in until you have stitched this to all the other blocks to keep those fabrics and their shapes stable and accurate. When you do take this out, if there's pieces that get stuck in the seam, some tweezers are helpful. Sometimes I use the point of my seam ripper too, that helps. And then of course, once you've put all your quilt top together, then rip the paper out, and then you can take your iron with steam and go ahead and set all these seams with steam if you'd like. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then click below to like and subscribe. If you want to learn about something else, let me know in the comments. And of course, these patterns and tools are available with the links below. Happy quilting!